The Money Show brought to you by the Old Mutual Investment Group. Do great things. We're seeing contagion in the mining sector spreading from Impala Platinum earlier this year to the bloody standoff at Marikana to Amplats, which is tonight thrown down the gauntlet. No negotiation. Get back to work or get fired. From the platinum sector, it's spread to gold. Goldfields affected, and today Anglo Gold Ashanti disclosing it's facing massive disruption. Daniel Silke is the independent political analyst who's been watching the various moves in the sector very closely. It's probably the most predictable contagion ever, Daniel.
Well, I think it may be predictable.
Oh, Daniel. Going to have to try him on a different phone line, I think. Daniel Silke, sorry. It sounds like he's speaking to us from outer Mongolia or Antarctica. Let's try him again. There you are. No, much better.
I can hear you, Bruce.
And I can hear you much better now. So let's go back and spontaneously I say to you, this is the most predictable contagion ever, isn't it, Daniel Silke?
Well, it may be a predictable contagion in relation to what happened at Marikana and the follow-on, but it's certainly not predictable in terms of what elements within the ANC would have liked to have happened. And only a few months ago, Trevor Manuel was launching the National Planning Commission's report, which called for perhaps a much more understanding and cooperative trade union sector within South Africa. And literally within a few weeks of that, we've seen Marikana and the follow-on of that. So I think that it's probably the worst scenario possible for the pragmatists within government. It's certainly not something that they want.
It's not something that the pragmatists want, but does it serve any political purpose whatsoever to have a destabilized mining sector?
Well, I think the bottom line here is that there are competing visions for the future of South Africa. There is a centrist vision, which I think is shared by many within the ANC and perhaps even within many of the opposition movements, and there's a more populist movement who have gained traction as a result of Marikana and as a result of Mr. Malema's mobilization of these forces. And I think we are seeing this playing itself out. It's going to play itself out, broadly speaking, in South African party politics, and I think it started initially perhaps in the trade union sector, where organization and the immediate demands of workers are often more acceptable and are more acceptable to politicians than waiting for an election to propound this kind of viewpoint. And that's why I think we've seen it at first in the labor movement.
Okay, so we see this happening in the labor movement, but when you talk about the centrist view versus a more radical view within the ANC and within other sort of political parties and political movements, which way is this going?
Well, I think if you look at, broadly speaking, South African politics, you will see that South Africans generally have been centrist. Over the course of the period since 1994, extremists or populists have largely been marginalized within the political debate. So I would argue that the centrists, in popular terms, still hold sway within South Africa, but the debate is crystallizing into the centrist versus populist milieu, so to speak. And I think it's going to dominate our politics and our labor relations over the course of the next 2 years. It really is the worst possible scenario for a country that should be attracting foreign investment, that should be reducing its input costs, and should be competing globally. This current polarization of South African politics, I think, is certainly going to hamper our advancement into being really a competitive nation and with job creation going with that.
And we see this increased radicalization of the workforce, and it's almost inevitable, I suppose, that COSATU-affiliated unions have to earn their keep. AMCU has rattled the cage, the mining cage, the union cage, if you like, when it comes to the scenario in which they find themselves, because suddenly that radical view is populist, it's finding some traction in the mining sector, and naturally COSATU-affiliated unions are going to have to play that game or lose relevance.
Well, that's right. I think that there's competition within the trade union movement for members. There is a more radical view versus a more establishment view of the world. And if COSATU want to remain relevant amongst the more radical workers within the country, they themselves are going to be forced to, in fact, become more populist in what they call for and, in fact, in what they exact from the employers within South Africa. It's overall a radicalization, and that's the legacy, I think, so far that we've seen from Marikana, a radicalization of the labor movement within South Africa, and of course it extends well beyond that into the political realm as well. It's going to be a battle royal in South Africa over the next couple of years. It's not just about Mangaung in a few months' time. I think it also has impact on the 2014 general election, and it looks very much as though Mr. Malema, who continues to stir the pot when it comes to labor relations within South Africa, is throwing down the gauntlet to the ANC and saying, look, I can create this level of disruption, maybe you want to reconsider my suspension and bring me back into the fold, or else you'll lose support in the 2014 election, something the ANC really cannot afford to do.
I was at an event today where Dina Pule, the communications minister, was berating journalists for giving airtime and giving coverage to Julius Malema, saying, these spent forces, and was really diminishing the way in which we should see Julius Malema. Is he a spent force? I mean, we look in Polokwane, we look at the footage today, the crowds that turned out to support him were very enthusiastic, but considerably smaller than the crowds he would have drawn a year ago.
Well, I don't think this is just about Mr. Malema. It is about these two competing visions for the future of South Africa. Malema might be the immediate apparent frontman who gains the media attention because of his persona, and in particular because of what we wait to see him say about President Zuma. The matters are much bigger than Mr. Malema, for that matter, and I think that the populism that is bubbling under the surface, Malema articulates it, but it bubbles under the surface even within the existing ANC, at high levels within the ANC, perhaps even among certain cabinet ministers within the ANC. It's certainly well beyond his persona. He himself, I think, has limited traction in terms of popular support, but the overall notion of economic freedom for millions of South Africans who feel as though they've derived little benefit over the last 18 years or so, that's very, very strong.
Now, when you look at it in terms of the battle royal, as you describe it, you depress me when you say this goes beyond Mangaung, because I feel that South Africa is hamstrung at the moment with these silly, petty, internal political squabbles that are holding the rest of us to ransom. You want this political thing to end and for delivery to begin. Otherwise, our future is tarnished by stupidity of bickering.
Well, that's right. When you look at what government is trying to accomplish, when you look at the midterm review, when you look at all the issues that are holding government back in terms of poor education delivery, second-grade healthcare services, heightened levels of corruption, all of these issues are stymied in South Africa because of the broader ideological political battles that are being fought. But this is a country that's maturing. It's moving away from the gloss of liberation. In fact, there's not much left of the gloss of liberation, and it is really now confronting its future. So it's a critical period for the country in confronting its future. And just like other countries of the world who have perhaps a two-party philosophy that emerges as the political system matures, it looks very much as though South Africa is also moving towards a two-party philosophy. It's not a bad situation for South Africa in that we will have to confront which side of the tracks do we want to fall, and all those who believe in a moderate, pragmatic center and a competitive global participation for South Africa in the global economy, they will certainly have to, I think, stick together to fend off a more populist approach. It's going to be a little bit like Venezuela, for that matter. In Venezuela, of course, Hugo Chavez took power, and I think in South Africa, those who wish to prevent the populists from taking power will have to effectively bandy together. This will create, in a sense, also a future realignment of South African politics that is very feasible now over the course of the next perhaps 3 to 5, 7 years or so.
Tito Mboweni, when he was Reserve Bank governor, would often quote at length the history of the ANC. And he says, if you understand the history of the ANC, if you read the history of the ANC, you will learn to understand that the centre will hold. Now, that's a view that is probably 5 or 6 years old. I wonder whether or not he still believes it. What do you believe?
Well, I think it depends really on whether any one side can gain a sort of critical mass. In other words, if there were mass uprisings across South Africa by those who seem to be in favor of nationalization or populist approach, then I think we would see a crack in the center holding. For the moment, the resources of South Africa are, broadly speaking, still within the ambit and control of centrist forces, the business community, and for that matter, the ANC centrists currently, and I don't see any change in that immediately. But I do think that the lack of delivery within South Africa and the ineffectual leadership that is apparent from a variety of different sources within the ruling party. I think that this is contributing and destabilizing the political situation within South Africa, and we are going to see this battle royal into the future, which, whilst I always say it's a fasten your seatbelt scenario for us, it's a very necessary step for us to make the break from the constraints of the post-liberation period into a new, more dynamic era where real economic alternatives are discussed and voted on by South Africans. It's high time we moved into this era, and high time we moved into a new political future as well, with really competing ideologies.
Daniel Silke, independent political analyst, never a dull moment.